Okay, now before we have our first speaker up, if you've ever been here before, you know we like to share fun facts. We don't like to read bios, that's no fun. So, Ilya, 3 fun facts about our friend Ilya. So Ilya likes to eat kiwis with the skin on. Sorry, I'm not supposed to judge. Okay. Ilya has been interviewed on the street as a Raptors fan twice. That's cool. And he spent all of grade 12 wearing toe shoes and sees nothing wrong with that. All right. Let's welcome to the stage, Ilya.
Who lives in a pineapple under the sea? Absorbent and yellow and chorus is he. If nautical nonsense be something you wish, then drop on the deck and float like a fish.
Thank you for indulging that. All right, what's up? Are we on? What's up, everybody? Okay. What do these 3 things have in common? Ogres, cakes, and stories. They have layers. That's exactly right. And I'm going to try to tell a multi-layered story here, because the story of the about 10 months after I graduated undergrad has about 3 layers. The first one, the one that I might tell on LinkedIn, the one I might tell at a job interview, is that 2 friends and I tried a couple of cool ideas, got some fun users for all of them, built them out, really learned a lot, and then moved on to fun careers afterwards. The Fuckup Nights version of the story might be something like 3 23-year-olds haphazardly dash from idea to idea, making every mistake in the book, dropping off one by one, and eventually moving on to things that paid more money more securely. Part of the story that I want to tell is 3 23-year-olds started trying to do this whole startup thing, and Ilya learned some really, really uncomfortable shit about the way his mind works. And I'm going to try to tell all 3 layers of that story, but as much as possible focus on that last one, because especially I think that's the kind of thing that's not talked about enough. Still working? Still working. Okay. A bit of context on me. This is me in high school. High school Ilya really liked sports, but specifically high school Ilya really liked sports that were based on pain, as you can tell by my face in all 3 of these pictures. If there was a sport where I could take an advantage by being more uncomfortable than the other person, that was the sport that I did. I like weaponizing my masochism. And so down there, that's me at the bottom of a pile of boys. That sport is called rugby. And one of the things that led to was developing both a sense of agency, the idea that I could push through things with willpower and that nothing wasn't too hard if you just fucking grit your teeth enough and keep pushing through it. But also, it was exactly that I am not prey to my mind. I get to university, I go to U of T engineering, I do sports for the first year, and then I stop. And there's a whole void there. I want to fill that with other things. And so I fill that with everything under the sun. I start doing clubs of all kinds. I think I was part of 15 different organizations, do 7 different internships, have 3 different side projects at the same time. And so there's a lot more school, there's a lot more work, a lot more big dreams, a lot more high fives. Thank you. Turns out that that's not a prayer emoji, that's a high five emoji, and then people started using it as a prayer emoji afterwards, fun fact. But things that went down the shitter. Number 1 was sleep. I'm an obsessive journaler, so I went back, and there wasn't a single week for 4 years in which I averaged over 6 hours of sleep, and there were only 14 days on record or 14 nights, I didn't always sleep at night, in which I slept over 8 hours. So that wasn't great. Number 2 was the idea of a schedule. While in theory I was obsessively doing Google calendaring and to-do listing and whatever, my life was basically careening from crisis to crisis because I realized that I could only really do work when shit was about to hit the fan. I don't know if that's relatable to anybody here, but that started being how I did life. And so, from the outside, it seemed like I was doing a lot because I had to do a lot. Every day had to be do or die for me to do anything at all. And so I started developing this fun little quirk that I called avoidance, which is I would have a shit ton of things to do. I would either do none of them or I would do one of them, hole up in a room, avoid everybody, and just do that thing until it was done. Or until it wasn't. Now again, everybody procrastinates. I don't know a single person who doesn't. If you do, you're a lovely, lovely freak and I would love to hire you. But There's procrastination, and then there's like not submitting something for 4 months until after it's due. There's like actually holding up in your room for 3 days and people being like, yo, you good? And afterwards being like, yeah, man, totally fine. So, like this kind of thing. At the time, weirdly, I didn't see this as a problem. I saw this as, this is just like the way I do work, and work is really important to me. And at the end of the day, the results are there. I would both cling to the identity of who I was, the idea of, oh, I'm really disciplined, I'm really steady, this is what people say about me, this is what I say about myself. But also, I would say that this is like part of the package. You can't have me be creative and be scheduled. God, how could you possibly do that, right? So this was kind of the thing that I built up about myself. I did a lot of UX roles, did a bunch of like business process and consulting type roles, and started being really curious about startups. Then towards the end of undergrad, I linked up with those two fine gentlemen. I still look like that down there. And we were all curious about doing startups. We had done a bunch of internships. We thought that, like this would be the next thing that we could learn the most from. We wanted to build out something and prove to ourselves that we can build something that people love. And when my best friend in university, Mohammed, and I linked up with my buddy Austin, and all three of us were interested in making technology for habit formation, because Mohammed and I had built, as part of an undergrad thesis, a chatbot that helped people stick to a journaling habit. Austin over there was working on like a marketplace for plans so that people who had done things could help other people go down those same paths. We were like, hey, we should work together. We applied to Y Combinator. Weirdly enough, we got an interview. And so all of a sudden we had 3 weeks to build things out. And off we went. So this is right at the end of undergrad in 2019. Also on the side, I started teaching math and public speaking because that is how I was going to pay my bills. This is where we enter the part of my life that I like to call holy shit. And at the top is the business timeline. And this is, again, the layer of the story that I might normally tell with like some vulnerability. And at the bottom is my personal timeline. This is what Ilya felt like. So initially, we get the call to Y Combinator. They accept us before we have a product or any users. They say, hey, come out, tell us about what you've got going on. So all of a sudden, we're like, oh crap, we didn't expect to get any kind of interview. So what do? In 3 weeks, we have to build something out. We have to show them that we don't have progress, but what we do have is speed. Right? Like we are able to build stuff really quickly, and if you just take a chance on these young kids, then man, they're gonna go to the moon, baby. And so we start building. We still have exams. Mohammed and I still have a thesis to write. So we're building. But at the time, I'm like happy, I'm sprinting, I'm like, this is what it's all about. We get to San Francisco. The first night that we land, I don't sleep. I basically spend that whole night writing that thesis that I mentioned because, as I talked about my working style, that was the last night, like 3 weeks after paper submissions for the thing that the conference we were supposed to present at. The next day, sleep 5 hours, wake up, we drill interviews for a whole while. We get to the interview, we do it, and after you do a Y Combinator interview, you get feedback later that day on whether or not you got it. So we go and watch Endgame. So we're sitting in Endgame, and we are waiting to see whether or not we get a response. We get the response that it's a no, very reasonable. And then my co-founders fly back to Toronto. I stay in California for 2 weeks to try to rest a little bit and travel on my own before coming back and starting to build in earnest. I realized 2 things about myself at that point. Number 1 was that I was ridiculously fucking burnt out from 5 years of never stopping. And number 2 was I wasn't actually sure that building a startup, and specifically the one that we were building, was a good way to have a positive impact on the world, or at least the kind of positive impact I wanted to have. But thought, we're already in here, might as well do this whole building thing, and I'm building with people who I really love and really respect. So I'm questioning and realizing I'm super fucking tired. 2 weeks later, come back to Toronto, and we start building. And it's going pretty decently. We're building out like some basics of a product. We have people who we're starting to test with. And I hit my first avoidance spell. So when I say avoidance spell in this case, pretty much every time I'm referring to having a task to do, being a little bit delinquent on it, feeling real ashamed about that, and then hiding in my apartment from people who I love, trust, and have put their faith in me. That's what I'm talking about when I talk about avoidance. It looks like that, right? So I have my first avoidance spell. paper it over, was like, oh, I was gone for 3 days, that's fine. And then Mohammed and I go to the academic conference that I mentioned, the one where we were like talking about the paper that was the underpinning for the thing that we were building. And that was the first like real bit of like positive feedback that we had gotten. Like we present in front of a bunch of professors who do this kind of thing, and they themselves go, are you guys gonna turn this into a company? And we're like, oh my God, really smart people think we should turn this into a company. Holy shit, we're on the right thing, right? So we keep building. Here's the thing that we realize about a product that we are claiming is supposed to help people build habits over time. To tell whether it's working takes time, right? If what we're saying is this is going to help you stick a habit for like 3 months or 4 months, probably takes about 3 or 4 months to realize whether or not that's the case. We don't have the patience for that. In some ways, we don't have the runway for that. And we're not that committed to this idea. We just want to build some shit, right? I should have taken it as a sign that I was like, if not this idea, the next one, this next completely different one. But I didn't take that as a signal. And so when we decided that we were going to switch to something else, I felt relieved. I was like, that little avoidance spell, blip of the past, not even affecting the thing we're going to end up building. We're going to build something great. So we start thinking about a next idea, and this is holy shit part 2. We're working on a thing called Want Some now. This is about 2 months later. We're working on a thing called Want Some. Want Some was a way for you to buy and sell food from your neighbors. We were like, what was a problem that we would want solved? Well, we want food cheap, we want food convenient, we want food healthy. Usually you can only get 2 of those 3 things, but hey, what if I cooked a bunch of stuff, and then somebody came in my building and was like, hey, did you cook a bunch of stuff? Too much for you to eat? And I was like, yeah, want some? Bring a Tupperware container. Sounds neat, right? So we start building this. It's a ridiculous idea. I can't cook for shit, right? But I get some Instant Pots. I cook out a bunch of like things that I know how to cook, like chicken and buckwheat. If you're Russian, you know it's fire, right? And then I get these little slips of paper and I start walking around my condo building, slipping them under people's doors. And what I ask them is, hey, my name's Ilya, same picture you saw up there, and I am in your building. Sometimes I cook too much. Here's my phone number, text me, and if I ever have extra stuff, you can come by, I'll give you some, and you just like give me $5, right? And this was like a basic user test before building, coding anything out, just to see, I don't know, would anybody even bite on this? And it turns out the answer was yes. We expected like 2 or 3 people to text back. Like 25% of the people who I put the slip of paper under texted back. And so we were in business, right? I've got like a farm of Instant Pots running and people are coming by. I'm like slopping food in there. I asked them this question of like, why are you okay with this, right? And they were like, wait, you're eating this stuff, right? And I'm like, yeah. Then they're like, it can't be poison, right? And that's it. And that was enough, right? So which was cool. It seems like we're in a promising place. We start building this out of my building. I get people who aren't me to start cooking. So now it's like time to build an app, right? Something that could be more sustainable. And I was, in theory, the UX guy on our team. And so we were like, okay, just build out a basic interface. I'm like, cool, I'm going to go home and I'm going to get that done. I go home, I do not get that done. Instead, despite everything, I hit an avoidance spell. And I mean a really bad one. I mean, I am in my room for a week. Eventually, I hear a knock on my door, and my buddy Mohammed, who's in the audience right now, knocks on my door, and he says, "Hey, yeah, there he is. We're still friends." He says, like, "Hey, you doing okay?" And it's really hard for me to say yes. So he comes in, and he starts. Mohammed is a devout Muslim. I'm not particularly religious, but he starts telling me verses from the Quran as ways to give me meaning. I've heard of people finding religion in hard times. I've never heard of religion finding them. It was a ridiculous moment in which I was like, wow, I must have sunk pretty low. But you know what? Get inspired by my co-founder and his faith. Eventually, get back out of my room, not Muslim, and we keep building. We built until the point where we realized that what we are building is actually illegal. It turns out that there are these laws in Canada, in Ontario and Toronto, somewhere around here, that say that you cannot cook food, not just sell, you can't cook food for other people if it is in an unregistered kitchen. Right? And so we maybe could skate by on Uber rules being like, hey man, we're just connecting people, like what they do is their business. But we would be bringing cops directly to the doors of our chefs if this was ever to get big. Between that and the fact that there's not a lot of margin if somebody is selling a home-cooked meal for $5 or $6 and nobody's gonna buy a home-cooked meal for more than that, we decide that maybe this isn't the idea. And again, I am so relieved. Indeed, I'm ecstatic because I'm like, you know what? I've learned my lesson. I've got my buddy's religion behind my back. And these are all just figments of the past. You know, this avoidance thing not going to happen again. Blips. So we get on to the third thing called Witti, and if you can tell by this bottom thing, it doesn't go awesome. But the idea behind Witti, initially Smart Shop, before nobody could remember the name, because they were like, Shop Smart, Smart Shop, right? The idea behind it was, ever hear No Honey? Yeah, honey. So a similar thing. It was a Chrome extension that was basically a digital shopping assistant. It was we would inject buttons into websites on which you shop, where when you click on the buttons, each button was inside a product. You could see all of the information that was pertinent for you to make an intelligent shopping decision. We came to this when we watched, both myself and Austin watched our partners at the time shop online, and we were like, there's no fucking way that's how you do that, right? There's no way you find like the one thing that you like, and then you proceed to open up 20 tabs on every other website to see if they have the same thing and see if they can find it cheaper, and then find and see whether or not they could find something similar. And then also you're checking whether the thing that you saw last week on each of these websites is for sale. Like, surely a computer should be doing some of this work so you could be doing literally anything else, or even more of the thing that you are currently doing. So Austin and Mohammed scrape like 20 different websites, just get their data off their website within a day. We build a little Chrome extension, and we're rolling. We have something that can accurately track the historical prices and of any kind of shopping website on most major stores in Canada. We take over a subreddit. So we go into, does anybody here know Frugal Male Fashion? Yeah, exactly, right? So Frugal Male Fashion is a subreddit that is exactly about what I just said. Frugal Male Fashion Canada is not the 1.3 million of the general Frugal Male Fashion. It is about 35,000 people. So we're like, perfect. These are our people. If they like our thing, if they don't like our thing, nobody will, right? So we get in there. I learned to speak Reddit. I'm not a Redditor, and I know I can't like sound corporate. So we go in there and we say, hey guys, like, we're building something because we're like you, and you know, like, we're putting stores on it. What do you want? And we end up being the highest rated thing in that subreddit ever. We get a couple hundred users, and we're off to the races, and there's things to do, and I lock myself in a room. You know, like take another 5 days, get out of that room, and things, meanwhile, are going well. We're like picking up users, we've got test users, we're adding stores all the time. Every time we make a post on that group, more users are coming on. All the kinds of things that are like pretty good signals for a startup. Then my buddy Mohammed decides that this is, enough is enough. He needs to go and take a standing offer that he had from a large company. It was entirely like a reasonable thing to do, but I felt terrible because one of the biggest core pieces of shame every time I would lock myself in a room wasn't just about myself. It was about the fact that while we weren't burning a lot of cash, we were all living on something of a ramen budget. I knew that the people I was working with were brilliant, hardworking, already accomplished people who could be making so much money and doing other great things instead of working with a dude who locks himself in his fucking room, right? So, I totally understood, but this was his first confirmation of like, man, this is actually negatively affecting somebody I really, really love. And I was real fucked up about that. Again, I had another avoidance spell, and now it's literally just Austin tapping away on his own. He gives me a call, and he says, hey, that second application that we sent off to YC, that worked out. Dude, get out of your room, we're flying to San Francisco. So again, we fly over to San Francisco, we do another pitch. They say the same thing of like, y'all seem talented, but this is a little like not far enough along. You keep building out, we should talk in 6 months. I go, goddamn, yeah, that's motivation. That's exactly what we need to keep building. We've got a great product, and I avoid again. And when I say I avoid again, this time it's worse than it was before. Not only do I not have my friend the imam to like come into the room and pull me out, but also I can't ignore it anymore. I can't say that this is a blip. Every single thing that could have possibly happened to motivate me, every single extenuating circumstance, every single thing that was like, oh, this was just a quirk, this was just a thing of the past, this was just a small patch in a major operation, none of that was remotely convincing, because at this point it had been something like 7 months, and this was happening, and it was happening more. I started having nightmares. Now, normally my dreams are either like 3 weeks delayed in terms of how applicable they are to my life, or they're not applicable to my life at all. This time, every night would have some nightmare where for some reason, unbeknownst to me, I was going to prison. And I wasn't even like sad about this. I was literally like, oh yeah, this is good. Prison will be good. I'll have some time to think. I'll have some time to recover, and I'll come out. I'll be a better man. I'll be a better man after prison. I'll wake up and I'll be like, fuck, I'm not in prison. I'm avoiding my startup in my room. Shit. This was happening. Eventually, I message Austin and we meet up. And for the first time, because this dude's an angel, he's actually angry. It's been 7 months, it's been 8 months, and these people have been nothing but patient with me. I felt horrible about it the whole time. And then he's like, dude, I feel like you owe me more than this. And he was right. We talked about it. He said, I do still want to work with you, but we have to set up some kinds of parameters here. Like, we can't be doing this whole free-flowing thing anymore. You kind of have to earn my trust back. And that made total sense. And again, I thought maybe that would be the thing. There's some accountability here. People aren't being nice to me anymore. But I hit an avoidance patch within about 2 weeks from that. And at that point, I knew that I had to stop. I knew that it was told directly that I was negatively affecting somebody who I really love, that I'm holding back even this business. Like, he can move faster without me. There's somebody else who could be doing this job. And so I realized that this was something that I couldn't be doing anymore. And I really had some personal shit to figure out. The thing that we were building was going pretty well, and Austin built it out really, really nicely before he departed for his next role. We ended up at around like 15,000 monthly active users. He had it growing about 15% week over week. All the kinds of things that would indicate that, hey, maybe you could raise money on this, and like there's ways to monetize it, et cetera, et cetera. After all, we're in the shopping space. But what he realized, what I had realized, and what perhaps Mohammed had realized before, is that on top of all this bullshit, we were working on something we couldn't give a flying fuck about. This is the best I dress ever. And that thing about the toe shoes, that was true. So we were literally just building out a thing just to prove to ourselves that we could make something at baseline that people like. But that isn't enough to get you through the really dark times. You got to believe in it. And I know that I didn't. And I think once we had gotten our fill of going 0 to 1, Austin departed as well. But just to give the credit, he really built out a thing after I stopped slowing him down. Now, from there, I didn't launch into some other project. I took a full-time job at a large corporation, and the pandemic hit, which made for a really nice environment for me to figure my shit out. Because working at a large corporation in a pandemic can be really easy if you're an individual contributor, because you don't have to pretend to work. You just kind of have to do your work, and then you can fuck off. And there's a really, really consistent environment in theory, right? Because you're just in your apartment, the place I was hiding anyway. It's really convenient. But there was a long road to recovery. While I was doing all of this, there was somebody who was inspiring both me and this entire city. For those who don't know, that man is named Kawhi Leonard. And before Kawhi Leonard won Toronto a championship, he came from being like a middling draft pick to building himself up to being one of the best players in the league before suffering several really bad injuries. So at the point in time when we traded for him, we being Toronto, he was considered, he was considered a bad asset. I just clicked the wrong thing. Is there anywhere we can fix it? I don't know. All right. Anyway, I'll talk about Kawhi. He was considered to be a bad asset, and people talked about him as if he succeeded despite injury. This is where my meathead brain, the one who had done sports before, really kicked in. And I started treating what I was going through not as getting back to doing startups or anything like that. I started treating it as getting over an injury. And for those of you who haven't done it before, thank you. Getting over an injury is really, really hard because you don't just launch back in. You can't just work harder. Step one is to understand the injury, to understand exactly what is wrong with you, exactly where it's hurt, and where were the imbalances that led to that injury in the first place. Then you have to slowly start doing the movements that you want to be able to move again while changing the way you move because you don't want those imbalances to come back. You then have to slowly increase the load, slowly increase the amount of the range of motion that you're moving in, eventually start playing the game. And even when you have healed, even at the point in time when you are playing the game that you loved, even if you're doing better than you did before, you don't feel the same. And you have to accept that. You have to understand that you are going to feel unfamiliar even if you feel better. That's exactly the model that I took. For me, what that looked like was initially drastically reducing my workload. I would only do my job, and my job was pretty light, all things considered. I did a ton of reading. I tried to integrate a whole lot of different modalities, things like addiction, things like digital distraction, identity, depression, ADHD, and kind of understanding all of them, understanding how they apply to me, starting to turn those into tools, different ways of working that I had never used before. And that didn't work immediately. Like, this took years. I would try them, fall flat on my face, try again until I could do work in a consistent way. It felt unfamiliar, but it was the first time I was able to do that without a crisis. I then started increasing my workload. I didn't immediately go to doing tons of shit, even though intuitively I really wanted to. If I did good work for a week, I was like, I'm good. But no, I never wanted to let people down that way, in that same way again. So eventually I started doing a little bit more work at my job. Then I started taking on some side projects, then some more side projects, then leading some. So this is like working in a leadership position for the first time. And only after about 2.5 years was I in a position where I felt comfortable actually taking on something that is a more dynamic and leadership role. And that was about 1.5 years ago. And it's not like it's been smooth sailing from there. But the big change wasn't the fact that I don't make mistakes. One of the biggest things that you learn from coming back from injury is that people can often be at their best, at their very best after coming back from one. They don't succeed despite an injury. They succeed because of it. When you get injured, you get to know your limits, but you also get to know your capabilities. Your confidence doesn't come from ignorance, from a belief that you can't get hurt. It comes from an awareness and a knowledge that if you get hurt, you can come back from it. There's a lucidity to that, and something that can take people to heights that they never knew they could reach because they didn't know what their limitations were in the first place. When it comes to like lessons, like we had the blue line, we had the red line, yeah, there's business stuff to learn here. Check if your business is legal. Don't chase things that look good. Like, we interviewed at YC and a bunch of professors thought our thing was cool. Chase whether or not people love your thing, whether or not it's monetizable, whether it's sustainable. These are all things that you can read in a book. The 3 things I learned really were those ones, and I want to get into them. 1, the idea that you're the instrument. I recently learned that this is a thing that Rick Rubin says. That is a really, really smart man. If you want like a book that'll blow your socks off, read The Creativity Act. Everybody here, regardless of whether or not you stood up when you said corporate, whether you said startup, or an entrepreneur, whether you're working at a startup, what you do is creative. You do creative work, you are the instrument. You would never, ever play a concerto on an out-of-tune violin. Playing harder won't make that shit sound better. Eventually, you need to fix the instrument, and you have to figure out what that looks like for you. For me, that was also getting to the understanding that you don't rise to the level of your aspirations, you fall to the level of your system. You can't dream your way out of your reality. Your floor ends up being far more important than your ceiling. The second one was the idea of relying on others. I realized that every time I imagined success, I was imagining myself, even though I was working with people and I loved working with people. The problem with that was that meant I had to be perfect. That meant that I couldn't have any weaknesses, and nobody else could be part of that process of me overcoming those weaknesses. Now, when I imagine success, it is always in a group, because I know there are certain things I'm never going to be awesome at. There's going to be weaknesses that other people paper over, and there's going to be things that I find easy that they find really hard. Once I start imagining success in a group, it takes a whole lot of that pressure off, but it also makes it seem far, far more realistic. The last bit is the idea of focusing on what matters. And I mean this in 2 ways. Number 1, working on shit worth fucking up. That can't be your motivation every single day, but when things get really dark, that's going to be the thing that you draw on. Or at least in my case, that's the thing that I draw on. The second bit is, I talked about the business side of it, like don't focus on vanity metrics, focus on the real work. But also focus on yourself. I remember having a really, really bad problem with identity. The idea that if my work was going well, I was happy. And if my work was going poorly, I was feeling like shit. And I always thought that I couldn't de-identify from my work or I wouldn't do the work at all. I thought that that would be the only driver behind me actually doing any kind of good job. That's bullshit. It turns out that the more I de-identified from my work, the more I both held identity loosely in general, tried to identify less with anything, but even within the identity that I did keep, I tried to make other things important. The people in my life, hobbies I had, and other pursuits, enjoying life as it is, having projects that weren't my job. As I started decoupling myself from my work, I didn't notice any drop in performance. If anything, it allowed me to work on things I really cared about because I knew that if I fucked them up, and I knew that eventually, in some way, I would fuck them up, I would be able to persist because my whole being wouldn't crumble. So in terms of where I'm at right now, one other thing, that company that I mentioned that I was doing the teaching at, 4 years later, they reached out and they were like, hey, we know you do business shit. We know you were a good teacher for us. We're growing. We'd love you to help us grow. And I've been working at Brainpower for the last year. So the best thing that came out of that startup thing professionally was my side job. So right now, I'm the head of growth at Brainpower. We're doing fantastic stuff. I help adults learn public speaking, even though I don't know how to handle a microphone, apparently. And I try to spend about half my time working on things that aren't anything to do with money, things that I think would help us have a sustainably thriving humanity. All of that is currently going well. All of that could go to shit tomorrow. The biggest transformation is that I went from working haphazardly on shit I don't care enough about and pinning my happiness on success. And now I work systematically in a system that works for me on shit that is genuinely worth fucking up on because it's important enough and loving myself regardless of the result. That piece about healing, that piece about being able to go down, come back from injury over and over again, that's given me all kinds of peace. And it lets me keep my ambitions higher than they ever have been. And I don't say that in comparison to anybody. I say that in comparison to myself because that was the thing I was most scared of. I was scared of the idea that if I'm not able to do work the way I did it before, or if I'm not able to hold that image of myself, then I can't have those ambitions. And that's just not true. Knowing that I can come back from injury, it means that I can keep coming back again. And in the words of serial entrepreneur Rocky Balboa, that's how winning is done. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much. So wait, hang out for 1 sec. Oh, you got questions? So yeah, we're a little behind schedule, so we have time for probably like 1 or 2 questions.